every student absent who will be joining after 8:40, and then you
Okay.
will send me the list in the group or in the personal chat. Okay, then I'm just going to arrange the attendance of every student. And similarly, one thing that I just want to tell you, that I will also be judging every student's participation. So if I ask someone a question about anything, and if that student does not respond, so that student's progress will also be marked gradually. So you have to maintain the attendance. Olivia, thank you so much. No one is exempted. So you have to mark absent, whether that is CR, GR, or anyone in the classroom. Thank you so much. Okay, like I never want to start my lecture with such, I would say, aggression, because I just want that every student must be joining the class because this is for their interest. And after this semester, you will be sleeping, I know that. But now I think that you must be uh, awaking yourselves. Okay, now, so we are going to talk about American literature, that we have left some of the important ideals. We were talking about the Romanticism and Transcendentalism. So these two, I would say, important concepts are also the base of the American literature, in a sense that if you talk about Romanticism in America, so that is different from the Romanticism of England. On the other side, Transcendentalism was another rich concept belonging to American literature, and this concept gives the Americans or the American individuals enough authority to think about themselves, to rely upon themselves, to rely upon the nature that is the real essence of everything, that is the real unit of every production. So the transcendentalists, they were of the view that nature must be followed because in each component of the nature, God exists. So it means that transcendentalism, or on the other side, romanticism, or whether they are the subjective concepts belonging to the American literature, but still we have some space in which there are many other writers who have talked about otherwise. Okay, so in today's lecture, we will be exploring that how the transcendentalism helps the American writers and poets to know about the existence of the man, or on the other side, we will see that how the Romantic age explored new tendencies in American literature that also made the that also laid the foundation for American literature. Okay, so I'm just sharing my screen with you people so you may. Okay, is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
And it is 8:40. So now any student who comes after 8:40, mark him or absent. So the period of Romanticism and Transcendentalism, the period of Romanticism respected, so represented a revolt against classicism and its values, such as reason and form. So now you already know that Romanticism is a movement, even in America, even in England, that stood against the empiricism, against the classical values, classical reasons, classical literary forms, and it means Romanticism is a subjective movement that all the time stood against the the empiricism or the logical and the reasons, specifically in art and literature. The American variant of Romanticism was different from the European one, to a certain degree. So there was a great interest in Indians and their culture. So now you see that what is Romanticism in England. That Romanticism is all about, that one can say, about the subjectivity, the pure subjectivity of personal experiences, of personal, I would say, feelings and sentiments. So that was about, you can say, the subjective individuality of a single human being. And sometimes that person associates his experiences, he associates his feelings and sentiments with the nature. Like he takes assistance of nature to talk about his feelings. You know, in the fifth semester of history, you have talked about, we've talked about fourth semester, I think so. You must have studied of your own. You've studied the components of the nature, in which you've also studied at how William Wordsworth takes assistance of the nature to talk about his nostalgic past. Similarly, on the other side, B.B. Shelley, he also talks about and takes assistance of the nature phenomenals and natural components. John Keats, he also associates himself with the nightingale sometimes, sometimes with the other components of the nature to talk about his worries, his problems and issues and tensions through the poetry, through the concept of the nature. And this does not stop, even though you also know Robert Frost and many of the other American writers and poets. So they also did the same in this I would say regime of their subjectivity. So what American, I would say, Romanticism is different. Like this is, you see that they were more interested in Indian and their cultures. There are, I would say, many writers, even though belonging to this category, who have talked about the American people. Uh, there is Sherman Alexie. Yeah, Sherman Alexie is also one of the most important representative writers and poets of the English, of the Native American, or of the Indian, I would say, culture. So he is one of the most important writers. It means Sherman Alexie sees the culture of the America. He talks about the old tribes of America. He talks about every aspect of America. And let me tell you an interesting thing about Sherman Alexie's work, that if you are really interested in American literature, specifically in the Native American literature, then you must read Sherman Alexie after, but before that, you must read Howard Zinn, A People's History of the United States of America. And believe me, if you really study that book, rather it is long enough, but if you study that book, if you really understand the concepts of American culture, of the Native American culture, of their religion, of their traditions, of their civilization, you will be shocked to know that how rich culture was theirs and how they developed their culture, how they developed their different dialects and languages, and how they were celebrating that religiosity, that tradition, that culture for 10,000 years, living in living in a place that is called the America, the Native America. And after that book, when you will be studying Sherman Alexie, like I would say that you will be in a trance. You will be in a trance because the way he talks about the thing, talks about the American culture, the Native American culture, the way he represents them is marvelous. Like I've never seen such a writer full of literary language, full of literary ideas, full of, I would say that, full of knowledge of the culture. Like he has talked about, even though the cultural languages, he has talked about the characters of the Native Americans, and vice versa. So you must study because it is another important and big subject of today's world of American literature because it is recently, I would say that, represented by Sherman Alexie, who is uh, an active writer of the Native American culture. And on that study, there are many researches, there are many, I would say, that works on American literature that is developed recently. And before that, you will know the story of American literature, that how it was not developed, how people were unaware from this work, the work of the American literature, of the Native American literature. So I think that if you really want to know about more, you may ask me, then I will tell you how to start American, the native, the real American literature. Okay, so we were studying that there was a great interest in Indians. So Indians are the people, their people, the Native American people, and their culture. The writings were less political and religious. The topics were mostly American, and the writers stressed imagination, nature, and individualism. Okay, so we have already talked about that. Okay, why they have stressed imagination, nature, and individualism, because romanticism and transcendentalism is all about these things. The the Knickerbockers were a group of romantic writers who contributed to the Knickerbocker, a magazine published in New York. They named themselves after Washington Irving's A History of New York by Frederick Knickerbocker. So Irving was America's first professional writer and the founder of short story in the USA, Rip Van Winkle. Being one of the most famous short stories, it follows a hand-packed husband who falls asleep in a forest and wakes up many years later after the colonies have become an independent country. So this story, Rip Van Winkle, who centers around or revolves around one hand-packed husband, like the husband who accepts and acknowledges everything from his wife, a kind of, you can say, the one who is run with. So that is a hand-packed husband who falls asleep in a forest and wakes up many years later after the colonies have become an independent country. So it means he talks about his experience about the America, that how America was independent after the colonies they left the land. So this is a story about that experience. Then the legend of Sleepy Hollow is about a headless knight who terrorizes the inhabitants of a settlement. One sip of water. Okay, so that is the all about the legend of Sleepy Hollow, because I think that my thought is all the time disturbing me, and it really irritates when I speak. Just a minute. Okay, well, is about a headless knight and who terrorizes the inhabitants of a settlement. One thing important to know about American literature, another one thing I would say, not all the things are one important thing. Another important thing, let's say American literature is also about is also about, I would say, spiritualism, because spiritualism is another most important component in American literature, because the spirituality that the Native Americans have, that the Native Americans had, they were not only the believers of one thing, they were the believers of everything. As I've already told you, people, that that was the concept of pantheism. Like they were believing on multiple gods. Mm, what are multiple gods to them? The animals, even though the trees, the birds, even though the animals, and the mountains, and everything, even though the red color, even though the Old Testament, even though the Sasquatch is like a gorilla. So he is also considered to be the fatherly figure, and after that, the godly figure to the Native Americans. So they were very spiritual in their approaches, and even though they had hundred and thousand different dancing traditions, that okay, this is that this type of dance, this is that type of dance, this dance is specific and limited for this type of ceremony, this dance is for this ceremony. Like they have hundred and thousand different categories of the dances, even though. Okay, so it means that they were spiritual in their approaches, they were spiritual in their intaking of the ideas, and this is what we can call American, the real American literature, because I would say the real Americans were the Native Americans. But now you see that they are not the same Americans. They are the white Americans, and you already know that when Baba talks about the hybrid or hybridization, hybridity, so that is the same thing, I would say. That really preoccupies the Native American culture, preoccupies the Native American identities too. That now, if there are a few Americans, they do not have the same skin, the red skin, they do not have the same culture, because they were the followers of something else. But now they are forced to live in their own country as a minority. And you see that America, the American, the United States of America, the real America is not the same. And you, like when I most of the time watch their movies and watch news and all of the other stuff, I never felt so that okay, this is American, this is real American, because the real Americans were not white, they were red. Their skins were red, like the roasted chicken, and they had their round faces, they had their small heights, and they were having their long hair. It means they were having their flat noses. So they have a different identity, and you can easily understand them. You can easily identify them, even though. I will share a picture with you in the group, and after that, you will see that, yeah, this person, this identity is knowable. Like, okay, this is American, and you cannot compare that. Native America with the white American. There's a difference between both of them. So you see that how the whole America, the 50 states of America, United States of America, are actually overwhelming. I think I would say that overwhelmed, not overwhelming, because there are no more, even though trails and tales of the Native Americans in America anymore. How they actually occupied the identities of the Native Americans in Americans. James Fenimore Cooper was interested in life in wilderness and among the native inhabitants. So there is another writer. Like we have two writers. First was Washington Irving. The second is James Fenimore Cooper, who have talked about and who were interested in the life of the jungle, the inhabitants of the jungle. It means the Native American, because that was the real culture of America. And they were the strong and firm believers of that culture, of that religion. Might I have told you people a couple of times in my lectures during seventh semester, sixth semester, or before, that the Native Americans were so sacred. They were so sacred, and even they, if they were sacred and spiritual in their approaches and religiosities, they were believing everything around them as religious, as sacred and holy. Like I have quoted this example so many times that whenever they have to cut any tree, they were offering their prayers in front of that tree. They were actually writing a petition to the clergyman who was actually, I would say, the headman of that town or of that village. They were writing a petition that we are going to cut this tree for this purpose, and that purpose will be benefiting the people around there. And then they are actually, like, I'm not saying that they are writing the petition in a real sense. It means that they were actually asking in their own ways to give the permission to cut the tree. And after the permission, they were even able to cut that tree. But before that, they had to pray. They had to offer their sacrifices about that thing. This is how they actually love the American culture, how they love their culture. And on the other side, if they have to get the meat from buffaloes, and I would say that buffalo is uh, important to their culture because the buffalo was also the sacred animal for the Native Americans. And you will shocked to know about this fact when the white Europeans, when they attacked on the culture of Native America, there were, I would say, that thousand and million buffaloes over there, because that buffalo was the source of meat for them. That buffalo was a source of, I would say, sacred animal to them, and people thought that they are unbeatable. The Americans are, the Native Americans are unbeatable because they have different tribes. Roundabout there were, I would say that 50,000 के करीब जो है, there were tribes in the Native Americans. And those different tribes were living farther in the farther places. और वहाँ पे उनको defeat करना it was quite difficult. Like जब Americans जो हैं, जब sorry Europeans जो हैं वहाँ पे गए, like they were attacking on those people, but they were living like 70 people or 80 people in a place. They were not all together at one place because every little tribe is different from the others. It means that one tribe is different from another and they have their own culture, they have their own language, they have their own traditions, they have their own stories. And what about if you take the stories and the things of all the other tribes, the thousand and thousand tribes? What about that? means that it was not an easy thing to beat the Native Americans. That is the reason that it took almost 300, more than 300 years to defeat them and to kill them all. And that was the real reason. And you see that James Fenimore Cooper, he was interested in the life of in the life of the wilderness. He was interested about the lives of the inhabitants, the Native American. He wrote a series of 5 novels together because James Fenimore is another, I would say, that most proficient representative figure of the Native American literature because he talked about their culture, nativity, and all the other things. And then these 5 novels, a series of 5 novels together called the Leather Stocking Tales. And another interesting thing about the culture of Native American that they had uh, different, I would say, names of their cultures or of their people. Like I would say that if there is one tribe that is called Flatheads, one tribe that is called Flatheads. There is one tribe that is called, uh, I would, what was that? The Lesters. There is one tribe that is called Elliot. So like they have, even though you might have heard these names, Cherokee, then they have different Comanche. So these are different tribes of the Native American people, like the Comanche Indians and Cherokee Indians, and there are many other tribes too. So he has written a series of leather stocking tales, and they concentrate on Napi Bumpu, a white man living in the forests of New York, and his friend. Now you can also see that this name, Chinga Chingakgook. Chingakgook. Chingakgook is Mohican chief. So now that Mohican chief, Chingakgook, is also because the chief is like a godly figure to them. And this is a story like the first that I'll be talking about. This is a movie also that you can see of your own about the native cultures, and this is the last of the Mohicans. Okay, the last of the Mohicans, and I have watched this story, and this is interesting to know about the culture of the Native Americans, in which there is one Native man who actually escorts a female, a girl who was actually the daughter of a general, and the native man, he actually escorts that girl. His sorry, her name was Cora Montour. So he was escorting, the Native American was escorting that girl, Cora, from the daughter of the general, from one place to another. But during that journey, he faces different problems. He faces that sometimes she was kidnapped, and that person has to escape. The person has to actually let her free from that escape, and the story goes on. And if you are interested in this, you can also watch this movie. The one thing that I like about this movie is the music. The music, like the people who are actually in my friend zone on WhatsApp, they may have known that recently, not this recently, like I think that a couple of months ago, I have uploaded a status in which a person who was actually playing the flute, that was a Native American who was playing a flute on his knees, and there are a bunch of people around him, the white people who are actually listening him. So that music that he plays on that flute is actually the music of this movie, and that is the music of the Native Americans. And believe me, if you all know about the real history of the Americas, real history, the native history of America, you will cry it out when you will listen that flute. Like there were tears in my eyes because that flute talks about and narrates the, the culture of the native people. Like there is every single note in that flute that talks about the worries, the slaughterings, the killings, the, the problems and the issues of the Native American people. And it really made me cry at that time when I listened that flute. So the Last of the Mohicans is another perfect example, I would say, that talks about and narrates the culture of the America, the real America, the native America. Then we have another important writer that you already know, Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe is one of the most important figures of the American literary tradition. His life was filled with sorrow and suffering. After successful studies, he became an editor. He drank alcohol, and misfortune had a notable impact on his work. The Native Americans, including all the writers, even though they were alcoholics, even though there is another important theme in the poetry or in the works of Native American, alcoholism, and there is a reason behind doing that. Like Sharma Alexi explains some of the reasons that why they are drinking alcohol, because he thinks so that everything was snatched from us, everything, and just to erase that memory of the past, he, like every single person, like who are actually really conscious about their culture, like they take the assistance of alcoholism because they think so that this is the least thing that they can do. And he explains in an interview. And it means that alcoholism is an important subject or a major subject in the writings or in the poetry of Native America. And then, yes, you can see that Edgar Allan Poe, he was also a drunken. And when he was drinking all the time, he was not in his real sense. He was about to tell the stories, he was about to tell tell the tales that are not common, but they are some exceptional. Because in the real sense, as you can also take example of ST Coleridge, ST Coleridge, Kubla Khan. That is another exceptional piece of writing by Kubla Khan, by ST Coleridge, because that story also talks about, because he was a uh, drug addict, ST Coleridge. It was, I think, what was that?
Opium. Opium is a
Yes,
lot of
yes,
used
yes.
in it.
It was opium. Yeah. So that drug was opium. So after taking that drug opium, he remained all the time in a trance, and he then wrote Kubla Khan, and when it was about to be an end, at the end, the Kubla Khan, the story of Kubla Khan, and he could not, even though literally he could not write the end of that story because he woke up after that, and he woke up from that trance of opium after that, and he could never give a, an organized end to that story, an organized, I would say, ending lines to that story, because the story that he has written in the trance of that opium, of that drug, that was exceptional. That was, I would say, that in a link. You might have observed that sometimes in your dreams you are watching something that is in a real sequence. Sometimes it happens with me that okay, you are just going through an idea that is exceptional, and you feel, yeah, this idea must be worked upon. And these are the, I would say, that different things. So that is also another state of trance and tranquility in which he has written Kubla Khan. Similarly, if he was alcoholic, he has written some of the finest works in American literature, and that is, the history remembers him as Edgar Allan Poe, the great story writer. His writings are gloomy and bizarre. His characters are murderers, alcoholics, desperate lovers, and tortured prisoners. Like, does not talk about the same thing, but people really liked his stories. People really liked him because the things he was writing about, they were not the similar. They were not as similar as we can say that, okay, I write about society, I write about culture, write about this thing and that thing. No, they were different from these subjects or these spheres. They were the stories of alcoholics, of the desperate lovers, of the murderers, of the mutilators, of the prisoners, of the tortured prisoners. Okay, so you can see that he has taken a different picture of the society or of the culture of their time. If the people have talked about the positive side of the humanism, Edgar Allan Poe has talked about the negative side of the humanism. So his short stories often describe the darkest states of human mind and mysteries solved by logic. The most famous short stories by Poe include The Telltale Heart, The Black Cat, The Pit and the Pendulum, The Mask of the Red Death, or the Gold Bug. Okay, so even though the Black Cat is a story of a man who was actually a reasonable man first, but when he and his wife, they were fond of keeping pets like the cats, especially the cats and the dogs and the other pets. They were fond of keeping those pets in their houses. But something drastic happened in that house. That in a rage when he was actually having his drink, and after his drink, he actually killed that black cat. He hanged that black cat, and after hanging that black cat, what really happened that the after the next day, the whole house actually burnt down. Okay, like, so it means that he has taken just a minute. Recall. I think that someone is actually requesting to be in the meeting. So I had a call. Okay, so it was the writings of Edgar Allan Poe that he has talked about such a themes of the society, because I think that we are lacking of the time, so we had to just uh, complete it. And again, the Telltale Heart. I think that you must read this story. This story is another wonder of Edgar Allan Poe, and I will just leave your curiosity unfulfilled, because you will just read this story of your own. So I am just going to, yeah, another important writer, that is Ralph Waldo Emerson. uh, I don't know whether you people are actually getting something or enjoying these things or not, but I would say that American literature, because we haven't had any time to talk about these things and these ideas, because this is another category of literature. So if you're not enjoying this thing or getting these things, and I would say sorry to you, because I think that you must know about the history properly, and you know that this is my method all the time to talk the context, to talk about the background of the things, so that you can understand the text. When you will be studying the text, you can easily understand them, rather than I have another lecture on American before we will be studying the poems, that is about the devices, but I will just keep that to the next lecture. So Ralph Waldo Emerson, the poet of the nature, an essayist, essay expressing transcendentalist ideas. His friend Henry David Thoreau wrote Walden a philosophical book about his new birth near Walden Lake, where he spent 2 years alone. So now you see that Ralph Waldo Emerson, uh, he is called to be the poet of transcendentalism. And he has written an essay that is the nature. And in nature, he has, I would say that summarizes, he has summarized the the nature, that the phenomena of the natures, that how nature works. In the nature, in the essay of nature, he talked about that God is always near, near to the human beings. And then God reveals himself in everything, in everywhere, because there are three also the concepts related to this. The God is omnipresent, the God is omniscient, and God is omnipotent. So the God is omnipotent means the God is more powerful, God is almighty. The God is omnipresent means God is everywhere. God is omniscient means God is all knowing. God knows everything. So he, in his essay, The Nature, also talks about and reveals that God is everywhere. God is in everything. God is in the nature all the time. And in nature, we are able to find the perpetual presence of the sublime. Of the sublime. And what is that sublime? Definitely the God. So we can call that God's presence is real delight in spite of sorrows. And nature gives us better and high thoughts and emotions. So those better high thoughts and emotions, this is what we can say to understand in less words the essay of Ralph Waldo Emerson, The Nature. And when Henry David Thoreau, he also talked about, like because he was his friend, so their approaches were also the same. Another good writer. Do we have time after this lecture? I think that the lecture will be ended at 10, isn't it? Yes, anyone? We'll
Yes,
argue.
sir.
Really? I'm happy. Okay, then I know that you won't. Nathaniel Hawthorne, another American writer, literary figure, Nathaniel Hawthorne, from 1801 to 63, 1863. So Nathaniel Hawthorne, who has written the Scarlet Letter, and this is another good writing of Nathaniel Hawthorne, belonging to an era, belonging to an age. That age, I would say, that really strict or inspired with the I would say that with the concepts or with the ideals of the Puritans. And in the Scarlet Letter, you will see that how a woman faces issues regarding when she commits any kind of sin, when she commits adultery, how she faces different problem. But the man who was also the companion in that sin or in that adultery, but that person is exempted from this. But the woman, she has to face issues and problems regarding, because she cannot justify that sin, she cannot justify that adultery. And you may see that scarlet letter. Scarlet means the red is scarlet. Letter A. So the letter is like, you can say, the alphabet. So one of the most famous and important books in the American literary history, it tells the tale of Hester. So Hester Prynne, she is actually the protagonist, and she is the leading character of this story of the Scarlet Letter. A woman who is sentenced to wearing the letter A on her clothes, A for adultery. So like she has to wear like a necklace the A, the alphabet A, all the time, whenever she is in the crowd, whenever she's going to market, whenever she's going everywhere. So that big A, that means adultery. She has to wear all the time like a necklace, and so the people may identify her that she has committed adultery. She has committed some crime. and people were all the time disgusting her. They were feeling hatred towards her. They were feeling that, oh, how filthy she is, and they were spitting uh, on the face of her. They were actually throwing different, I would say, rotten fruits and vegetables to her all the time whenever she has to walk through the streets. And she lives with her daughter Pearl, and she is, I would say, a fine, uh, like a princess. She was a shiny, like as you can see the name of her, like Pearl. So she was as beautiful, and she was also as shiny as her name, and then evolves into a strong character. The book criticizes Puritan morals, prejudice, and intolerance. So this is all about, you can say, because as I've already told that the Puritan beliefs, they were actually criticized by Nathaniel Hawthorne, that where the women have to face the savagery, where women have to face, I would say that the such cruel behavior of the people, or of the religious ministers also, where a woman has to wear this letter A like a necklace all the time whenever she is going through. So this is another fine piece, I would say. And then, okay, leave this one and this one. Now coming towards American realism and naturalism. Let me see that who is. And Palvisha, I think that you are done with your task, because there are only 17 students in this class. And what about the other? There are 30 students, almost 30 students are missing. Okay, so mark every student absent. So American realism and naturalism, just as in Europe, the period of Romanticism was followed by the period of Realism. Writers left behind the styles and topics adopted by the previous generation and rather concentrated on describing life as it was with its negatives typical for the periods. And it was the era of industrialization and migration. Determinism was a major paradigm of the age. Regionalism also appeared, and a group of authors who described the customs and specifics of particular regions. Novel was the main genre. So American realism and naturalism was all about, I would say, uh, about the industrialization, about the migration, about the regionalism, because people were also interested about the regions, about the languages, about their different culture. And you can also see that even though in America, every single state is different from the other. If there are 50 states, so 50 states, I would say that constitution, different states, traditions, their cultural activities, their games, sports, they all are different from the other state. And it means that regionally, if you talk about, if you regionally talk about their culture, if you regionally talk about their languages, if you regionally talk about their I would say beliefs, so they all are different from one another. And it was not an easy task to, I would say, represent and to depict the life of every American person in the same temperament or in the same way. So we can say that the theme of regionalism is also one of the major themes in the American literature. Secondly, the industrialization, because the industries were also planted, and then the themes of migration. The theme of migration can also be described as, we see that in In the times of when America was the American people, they were actually having different setbacks, especially in the 19th and the 20th century. Then there were many people who actually migrated from one place to another just to have a good lifestyle, even though the basic lifestyle, not a good lifestyle. They were living on the lands. They were living on different, I would say, piece of land that they had actually for many years from their father and fathers. And after that, the landowners, they came forward and they try to plant some industries over there, and they kick off the people who were living over there. I would say that many years they were kicked off from their lands. Then they have to migrate from those places, from those regions to the central cities. And because the lands were becoming the industries, and industries were actually also taking place or taking the labor, because if there are 100 people working in a company, so industries are, you can say, all about the machines or all about the devices, and they were taking the place of those 100 hands. Like one machine is equal to 100 hands. So industries were also there, people were kicked off their lands, and that was, I would say, that the most desperate era, the era of depression. It is also called the ball of depression in the America. It is called the ball of depression, in which there were many people who have actually migrated from their lands to the other lands. There is another writer, American writer. Let me recall his name. Yes, John Steinbeck. John Steinbeck. He has written The Grapes of Wrath. So the state, this is the same story that he has talked about, because there was a family who was living over the land for many years, and after that the landowners, they kicked them off from the land, and after they were actually migrating from their regional land to a city, and during that there were different deaths. First of all, there was the death of an old man who was actually the headman of that family, and due to that, I would say, detachment from the land, due to the condition of being homelessness from his land, from his roots, he died in the way, and then the people buried him in the way, and they moved forward. And after that, another death was occurred. That was the death of the grandmother, because she could not bear the detachment or being homelessness, being homeless from the home, from the house where she and he was living for the rest of their lives, and for quite a years, and she also died. So you see that how painful journey it was, that the people have lost their houses, people have lost their lands, people have lost their money, just because of this ball of depression. Okay, so American literature also talks about regionalism, migration, and industrialization, and I hope so that you are also understanding that. So Mark Twain, you that is actually born Samuel Langhorne Clemens, was a great American novelist, short story writer, and humorist. He was a member of a local color school. He spent a major part of his life on the Mississippi as a boatman, which plays an important part in his writing. So he has written about some of the some adventurous tales, like the adventures of the Tom Sawyer, the adventures of the Huckleberry Finn. You might have seen this movie, or you might have studied this or not, because this is included, the adventures of Huckleberry Finn. This is included in fifth grade, sixth grade, or seventh grade in different schools and different, and they are being taught this as a child story. You may also watch the movie on this, The Adventures of Huckleberry, where a person who actually saw some of the uh, gigantic creatures, and he talked about those experiences. He talked about those. adventures of Tom Sawyer. So this was another, I would say, uh, about the writings of Mark Twain. So one another important work, that is, if you just go leave 2 or 3 lines, The Prince and the Pauper, and it also talks about that how they were two friends. One was a beggar, like a beggar, a pauper, like who has nothing to lose. He has nothing to, as a kind of, you can say, wealth or anything. And the second was the prince. So this is also a story about a poor man and a rich man who actually are friends sometimes, and sometimes the otherwise. It tells the story of a poor boy called Tom Canty who changes places with Prince Edward Henry VIII's son. The book brought a sharp critique of England's feudal system in the 16th century and people spoiled by their properties. So you can see that this is another story of Mark Twain, The Prince and the Pauper. You can also read this story. This is also one of the interesting stories of Mark Twain. You will easily find it. Okay, now, yes, another good writer, Harriet Beecher Stowe. Harriet Beecher Stowe has written the, the most important and one of the most revolutionary work, that was Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin is a story about the slavery. It is all about the slavery, that how the people of America, especially the black people of America, they faced the cruelty from the white people, how they were treated like animals, how they were migrated from Africa to the America just for their own benefits, just for their own, I would say, advantages. They were brought from Africa to America as ayahs, as servants, as chefs, as maids, and they were the planters. They were like, for the plantation of sugar cans. They were actually brought into America, and after that they lived over there. They were migrated from the Mediterranean Sea on heavy ships, and it means that this story, this Uncle Tom's Cabin, was all about the slavery of the black people, that how they were brought in America and how they faced different situations, how they were actually most of the times uh, faced that type of cruelty that they cannot bear. They had to be in the trunks, in the boiled water trunks, in the summer all the time, and they have to face that, I would say, the hotness of the summer all around in that hot trunk. So it means that we can say that they, relatively, they have faced a savagery, a brutality, a of America, of American people, especially of the white people. And this is the story, Uncle Tom's Cabin, all about the slavery. Because not only Harriet Beecher Stowe, but many of the other writers, they fought against the slavery. They fought against that you cannot make people slaves. And if you might have watched the movie Blood Diamond, and if you have watched the movie Django Unchained, you may know about more the slavery, that how they are treated in that movie, how they are treated in that area, because of the color, because of their complexions, and it is hard to say that it is unbearable. So Harriet Beecher Stowe, another, I would say, that literary figure who cared about the black people's rights, who cared about the black people's equality, freedom, liberty, that they must be, and he fought against this concept of slavery. Okay, so this was Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Then we have, if we have another important, yes. So now let's talk about American modernism and the literature of the first half of the 20th century. So now I think that we are coming towards our points. So what are the new ways? that were introduced in the 20th century or in the dawn of the 20th century. So writers were looking for new ways of writing and new topics. Just a minute, let me have some water. Okay, so they was looking for new ways of writings and new topics. Their writings expressed their feelings about living in the modern age. Some of them wrote positively, some negatively. Their style became more complicated, experiments were quite common, many movements appeared, together they might be called modernism. And modernism is another similar, I would say, movement that is also in the English literature and in the American literature. But as you know, that modernism is different from the modernism of the English people or of the English. So Ezra Pound was one of the most influential poets of the 20th century, and do not say that if it is Ezra and that is she. No, he was born in the USA, but he spent a long time in Europe. He also spoke many languages. He's one of the most complex writers in the American history. He was involved in pioneering new styles and movements, imagism. So now this is another good thing, that is another concept that he has talked about and introduced. It was imagism, images, the based on the images. Words provoke picture in the reader's mind. It means when you are reading something, so that reading is provoking or giving you or making a mental picture in your mind. It means that writing is so strong, the writing is in a way, that writing is full of life. Then when you read anything, then you can really experience that thing. It seems that the thing is that story is running in your mind and you are seeing them like a film. So that is imagism. Okay, so words provoke pictures in the reader's mind. Or Wokticism. His most important work is called Cantos. T.S. Eliot lived in Britain and wrote The Waste Land, a very complicated modernist poem. And E. Cummings was an experimental poet. His poems often played with form. So it means that we have, she has talked, sorry, yes, yeah. Ezra Pound has talked about modernism in a different shape, in a different style, in the form of images, and this is a new literary style because people were after to discover new things, to invent new ideas in writings, in literary styles, and they did so. Okay, and I think that we must stop right now because we also have some important writers to cover. But I think that we must be. Let me see if we have to cover any important writer from this, even though everyone is important. Okay, we also have an African American literature category over here. I think that you all must read it till the end, every single word of this article, okay? Because this will help you to understand every single concept in writing, and it happens. It matters a lot. Like as I've already told you, people about the things about the American literature, about the other literature, and you are now stuck with so much information. You are stuck with a lot of ideas. You are stuck. Your mind is stuck with so many new things also. And what you need to do, you just need to organize them all. As I have told them one by one. So you have to organize all these things in your mind in a sequence, because you know that sometimes I am off the topic to explain the things, to give some examples, and when I'm just coming back on the same line on the same topic, then might be it disturbs you, sometimes disturbs your sequence of ideas. So that is the reason that you may read this article once again of your own, to bring all the ideas and all the things in a sequence once again. So this is all about from this article, and the thing that that we haven't studied in this, you will go through of your own. Okay, now we have 20 minutes, and first of all, I will take your questions, and then I will be going to talk about another important, some of the devices of American literature or of English literature that are necessary to know, because we are going to read the poetry, and it is important to know about the devices beforehand. Yeah, I have already explained transcendentalism so many times. I think that you joined late. You joined at 8:40. Yeah, आप 8:40 पे हैं. Okay, but this is what I all the time say, that you have to join early, so that if you are missing some information, तो ये बाकियों को कसूर तो नहीं है कि वो उस चीज़ को बार बार सुने. I think that you must join it early. Okay, let me explain. Transcendentalism is a concept that focuses and stresses on the self-reliance and the nature, the existence of the nature, the presence of the nature in a godly way. And on the other side, we see that the transcendentalists believed that nature is the real picture of the God. And if you know about the nature, you know about the God. Because God is present in every shape of nature. God is present in mountains. God is present in jungle, in trees, in every component of the nature. So this is the idea of transcendentalism. So he write he wrote an essay on the nature, and if you read that essay, you may know about the languages, the languages of the nature, that how language makes you civilized, how language gives you ways to live in it, how the nature is the real, I would say, representation or the depiction of the God or the existence of the human being. Because nature is one that never changes, but the human beings, the time, everything changes. But nature never changes, it remains the same, but the interpretive behaviors, the interpretations of the people, they are different. So nature is static, but the interpretations are different. And with every interpretation, every new interpretation, it we come to know about more and more nature, more and more about the God. And you know that the this is the timeline that is coming from generation and generation, that they have seen the nature in their own meanings, in their own understandings, and now, even though we are seeing the nature with our own understanding, but nature remains the same, but the interpretations or the things that we are saying about or discussing or talking about the nature, about the phenomenals, about the miracles, about the components of nature, they are changing. Because if we are going more into it, we are recognizing the God more and more. So this is transcendentalism in simple words. I hope that you have understood. Okay, so we were talking about that we just need to go through some of the literary devices. Okay, but before that, let me see. whether you people are interested or not. Okay, should we do this in this lecture, or should we do this in the next lecture? Depends upon your, I think, endurance, because we have 14 minutes left, and if you, I think you can utilize these 15 minutes or 14 minutes with your questions, and we can arrange another lecture on the literary devices. Then we can be studying those things in that lecture. Yeah. If you have any question, you can ask me right now. Anything about the things that we've discussed today.
Excuse me, sir. The native
Yes.
the Native American literature, in which language it was originally written in? Native Americans use English language for their writing, or do they use their own native languages?
Okay. First of all, the Native American literature that was before 1492, it was not written. It was not even though literature. Literature. No, it was called orature, and that orature was in the form of folklores, in the form of folk tales, in the form of stories, in the form of narrations. And as I've already told, the stories were passed down by the fathers, by the parents, by the grandparents, by the great grandparents, and by their ancestors, by their forefathers and ancestors. So this was the medium of, of their literature. And on the other side, if we talk about the literature, it was written by the Americans. As I've already told you people, it was in the 16th century, in the late 16th and the early of the 17th century. Then the language was obviously the English, because I think that you have already gone through the previous lecture, in which I have told you people that this is the first era in which the writer has, I forgot about that writer who was actually the founder of American literature, if you may recall that writer's name. So he was the one who actually used English language, and after that, after that, he has also taken the subject of, of English, of the European writings too. But similarly, we see that the language was changed. That language is not definitely the language of the Native Americans. No, language remains English throughout the literature, because before 1492 there was no language. They had their languages, they had their different dialects. They have 300 languages, more than 300 languages. But those languages were only the verbal, for the verbal communication. They know the stories, they tell the stories in those languages. They were not the people who write the stories. They were not the people who write anything, because they were the storytellers, the best storytellers. They most of the time gather in a group, and they have to tell the stories of their experiences to one another, of their tribes to one another. So this was the medium. Writing was not the medium of Native American literature before 1492, but after 1492, the medium of writing was English. It was English. So the language, that is the reason we call that American English and British English. American English is different from British English in some ways, because I would say that the difference is in the dialects and the dialectal forms of language, because they speak English with skipping sounds, and like I was going. So they are speaking G sounds. Sometimes they are I'm doing, I'm doing my job. So doing, not doing. So like they have different dialectical, I would say that in languages. But on the other side, as far as your question is concerned, before 1492 there was no writing. They were the believers of storytelling and the narrations. They have to tell the stories to one another in, I would say, orally. But after that, then the stories, those stories and those writings, they took a shape of literature. So before 1492, it was orature, and after that, it was literature, and the medium was English language. Is that clear, Parth?
Yes, sir. It's okay.
Yes, anyone else? Yes, anyone else needs to ask any question, so you may ask right now. Or should I nominate you? I think that this is the thing that you must do of your own. Ask questions about the things. And I am all the time asking you people to calling your names to ask questions. Yes, Mahnur, Minahil, Rabia, Hira, Jannat, Fiza, Anam, Abdullah. Where are you people? ऐसा ना हो कि like I'm teaching uh, and you people are just sleeping. How American modernism is different from English modernism. Why don't you speak? Just posting your. I think that you all are in half sleeps. Okay, so modernism, yes, American modernism is different from English modernism because events are different in both of the countries. Events are different, happenings are different, people are different, their culture are different, their traditions are different. Their, I would say that their current issues are different. Their political affairs are different. So their language is different, literary devices are different, everything is different from them. And definitely they have to follow their ideals, they have to follow their literary styles in their writings. As I've told, that transcendentalism is a newness in American literature. You cannot find that transcendentalism in English too. So they have their own literary style, they have their own literary jargons and literary techniques to follow. So that is the reason we can say that modernism in England is different from the modernism of America. Okay. Yes. Anyone else?
Sir, what is the situation of Native Americans in the contemporary American world? We see many Afro Americans are being marginalized in the modern scenario of America. What is the about case of Native Americans? How are they living with the white Americans over there?
Okay. The white Americans, they are not actually giving them, even though equal rights. There are many books and many short stories about, like there is one book, Living on the Reservation. It is about, I forgot the name of that writer. Uh, Okay, so when I will be calling that name, then I will tell you. Living on the reservation. That is actually when the people are forced to live on the reservations, near, near sometimes the mines, near sometimes the industries, the chemical industries, because they are living over there in the minority form. They are living in the small groups, and they are doing whatever they have to do over there in those areas, and they are treated all the time as the minorities. Even though in America, in right now, they are not actually having, uh, they do not have full-fledged celebration of their culture and full-fledged celebration of their religion and all of the other things. Still, people feel afraid of their appearances because there are many Native Americans that they have the same appearances still now because they are the strong followers of their culture. And whenever they are actually walking in the streets in the white Americans, so they feel sometimes afraid of their identities because the I would say that the concept that they have actually dragged from the Native Americans' identities, it is very horrible. It is horrific. So most of the time we see that they are living on the reservations like the minorities. As you see that in this in Lahore, Yahunabad, Galaxy, and then Gajimata. These are the areas where most of the Christians are living, and they are living over those areas like a minority. Similarly, there are some countries like in America, people are living in Houston. Many Muslims are living in Houston. So that seems to be like, okay, that specific area is of the Muslims. So like Houston, many Muslim identities are living over there, like a minority, because they have their houses over there, they have their jobs and business over there, and they feel comfortable to live in that area. So Native Americans in the present America, still there are many Native Americans who are living in the remote areas, because America is not a small land. Even though there are 50 states, and one state of Texas is twice bigger than Pakistan. Can you imagine? So they are living in their ranches. They are living in the minorities. And there is another reference of Sherman Alexie, in which he has talked about that we are forced to live on the reservations. The reservations is basically a tract of land. It is a tract of land, a piece of land that is limited, and with the limited resources, they do not have sometimes, like this is the early 20th century that I'm talking about. They do not have the internet facilities over there. They do not have, even though you can say the basic facilities over there, they were bound not to read the Native American writers. They were bound not to interact with the white people. So there were different restrictions that were applied on them. And if you find any American Native American writer reading any Native American any man reading Native American writer, so that man would also be considered that he must be punished. All the books, writings were in their libraries only of those white Americans. So, like we see that they had lived a tough life in America, even though the country that was their own, and now it has become the country of the white people, of the white European, I will call them, the white Europeans. And they are now living in their own land, in their own country as a minority. They are forced to live on the reservations. Okay, so they are living in the reservations, most of the American, and some of them they are living in Mexico. Is
Oh,
that clear, Parth?
yes, sir, it's clear.
Thank you so much. Is anyone else? We have 2 minutes, and you may ask any question, because you know that my explanation is all the time long and more than 2 minutes, but still you can ask questions. Okay, I think that there is no. Okay, so Sen, thank you so much for attending today's lecture, and I'm really humbled that you have attended this lecture and gave me your privilege to be with you. And what about the other? Yes, Palvisha, you will be sending me the list of the students who were absentees, who are the absentees today. Then I will deal with them. Like deal in a sense that, okay, if I am just taking class and after that you have to appear in 10 minutes. Okay, if class starts at 8:30, you have to appear at 8:40, and before that you will be accepted, and after that you won't be accepted. So you will be marked as absent. Is it clear? So thank you so much. If you have anything to ask related to the things that we've discussed today, related to American literature and the history of American literature, you can ask me in the WhatsApp group. And you can also keep your questions uh, postponed in the next lecture or till the next lecture. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a good day. Allah Hafiz.